Have you ever wondered what happens when immense wealth and blinding arrogance collide with quiet, underestimated intelligence? This isn't a story about a simple affair. It's about a man who believed his money made him a king and his wife a mere decoration. He thought his private jet, a Gulfstream G700, was his personal chariot to a life of deceit, flying his mistress to the lap of luxury in Monaco. But he forgot one crucial detail. A king is nothing without his kingdom, and his wife, the silent queen, was the one who held the keys. What follows is a masterclass in revenge, a lesson in precision-timed destruction that unfolded at 40,000 feet. The evening light of late spring in Atherton, California, was the color of pale gold spilling through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of the Sterling residence. It was a light that made everything it touched look expensive, which was fitting because everything in the 12,000-square-foot minimalist mansion was in fact brutally expensive. The polished concrete floors gleamed like a frozen lake, reflecting the sleek lines of Italian furniture and the carefully curated modern art that adorned the walls. This was the world Richard Sterling had built, and he surveyed it with the casual satisfaction of a Roman emperor. Richard was a man forged in the crucible of Silicon Valley ambition. His company, Ethereum Dynamics, had revolutionized data compression, a feat that had made him obscenely wealthy before his 40th birthday. He was tall with a sharp jawline and hair that was just beginning to show distinguished flecks of silver at the temples. He wore his success like a custom-tailored suit, effortlessly, and with the unshakable belief that he had earned every thread. Across the cavernous living room, his wife, Shannon Valina Sterling, sat curled on a sprawling white sofa. She was reading a book, a physical paper and ink book, an object that seemed almost archaic in their hyper-modern home. To many of their social circle, Shannon was the perfect accessory to Richard's life. Beautiful in a classic, understated way, with intelligent eyes and a quiet grace that suggested old money, which was true. She was a Valina, a name that carried weight in East Coast circles, long before the first microchip was ever invented. But out here in the land of disruptive tech and venture capital, she was simply Mrs. Sterling, the elegant, unassuming wife of a titan. "Anything interesting?" Richard asked, not looking up from his phone. He was scrolling through market data, his thumb moving with a predatory quickness. "It's a biography of Hedy Lamarr," Shannon replied, her voice soft but clear. "Brilliant inventor, but she was mostly remembered for her beauty. People underestimated her. They couldn't see past the facade." Richard grunted a non-committal sound that acknowledged she had spoken, but not that he had listened. This was the rhythm of their marriage, now a vast, echoing space between two people filled with the hum of technology and the silence of things unsaid. Shannon had long ago accepted it. She had believed it was the price of his genius, the collateral damage of a man whose mind was constantly 10 steps ahead of the world. "I have to fly to Geneva on Tuesday," he announced, finally pocketing his phone and walking over to the bar to pour himself a glass of Macallan 25. A last-minute symposium on quantum encryption. Utterly boring but necessary. "I'll be back Friday." Shannon placed a thin silk bookmark between the pages of her book and closed it. "Oh, that is short notice. I thought we were having dinner with the Baldwins on Thursday." "Postpone it. Tell them I'm disrupting the future," he said with a wry smile, taking a sip of the scotch. It was one of his favorite phrases. He wasn't just running a company, he was disrupting. It was a word that excused any rudeness, any broken promise, any absence. "Of course," she said, her expression unreadable. He walked over and kissed the top of her head. The gesture was perfunctory, a checkbox ticked on a list of husbandly duties. "I'll have Julian prep the G700. Wheels up at 0800 Tuesday. The G100 Gulfstream was Richard's newest and most beloved acquisition. It was a monument to his success, a sleek silver dart that could cross the Atlantic without breaking a sweat. He spoke of it with more affection than he ever used for people. He had personally overseen the interior design cream leather seats, dark mahogany panels, and a state-of-the-art entertainment system. He called it the Apex. Shannon called it a 10-ton, $100 million insecurity. Later that night, as Richard slept the deep, untroubled sleep of the truly arrogant, his phone left charging on his bedside table buzzed silently. Shannon's eyes opened in the darkness. She wasn't a snoop. She considered it a vulgar and desperate act. But for months, a small, cold knot of unease had been tightening in her stomach. It was in the late-night board meetings. The faint scent of an unfamiliar perfume on his jacket, the way he had started locking his personal laptop. Something he'd never done before. She reached over her movements, slow and deliberate. The phone unlocked with a swipe. He hadn't even bothered to set a passcode. The message was from a contact named CS. "Can't wait for Monaco. Forget Geneva. You're my favorite city. I've already bought the perfect dress for the Grand Prix. XOXO. Monaco. Not Geneva." The screen illuminated Shannon's face in the dark, and for a moment, the quiet, graceful facade of Mrs. Sterling cracked. The message wasn't just a confirmation of an affair. It was a testament to his utter contempt for her intelligence. He didn't just think she was unaware. He thought she was stupid. He believed the gilded cage he had built for her had finally rusted her mind. A cold, clear rage, sharp as a shard of ice, settled over her. It wasn't the frantic, tearful anger of a woman scorned. It was the calculated fury of a CEO who had just discovered a fatal flaw in the company's code. Richard Sterling wasn't just having an affair. He was making a fool of her. And Shannon Valina, Sterling, daughter of Arthur Valina, would not be made a fool. She placed the phone back on the charger, the screen dark once more. She lay back down, her breathing, even her body, still. Richard murmured in his sleep, oblivious. The Emperor was sleeping soundly in his palace. He had no idea that the foundations were already beginning to crumble. The days leading up to Richard's Geneva trip were a masterclass in composure for Shannon. She played the part of the dutiful wife flawlessly. She discussed his flight plan with the household manager, had his suits dry cleaned, and packed his briefcase with the files he'd requested for the symposium. In all her actions, there was a serene, almost placid quality that Richard mistook for compliance. In reality, it was the calm before a hurricane. Her first call was not to a divorce lawyer or a tearful best friend. It was to a discreet number in San Francisco, a number she had on a slip of paper hidden in a locked jewelry box her father had given her. "Miller Investigations," a gruff voice answered. "This is Shannon Sterling," she said, her voice steady. "I need to retain your services. The highest level of discretion is required." Detective Frank Miller was a man who operated in the shadows of the Bay Area's elite. He was a former SFPD detective who had found a far more lucrative career uncovering the sordid secrets of the 1%. He listened without interruption as Shannon laid out the facts, the late nights, the sudden trips, the name CS, and the Monaco text. She was concise and unemotional, presenting her situation as if it were a business problem in need of a solution. "I need to know everything, Mr. Miller," she concluded. "Who she is, how long it's been going on, and I need it before Tuesday morning." "That's a tight timeline, Mrs. Sterling," Miller said. "But for the right price, the truth tends to surface quickly." The truth, as it turned out, had a name: Chloe Summers. She was 24 years old, a model and influencer, with over 1 million followers, who knew her for her posts from exotic locations, often featuring glimpses of private jets and lavish hotel suites. Her online persona was a carefully curated fantasy of effortless luxury. Miller's report, delivered to Shannon via a secure server less than 48 hours later, was devastatingly thorough. It included photographs of Richard and Chloe at a secluded restaurant in Big Sur, his hand resting possessively on her back. There were pictures of them leaving a high-end jewelry store in Beverly Hills, Chloe carrying a small, distinctive blue bag. The report detailed their affair for the past 6 months, a timeline that coincided perfectly with Richard's sudden increase in emergency business trips. Shannon stared at a photo of Chloe wearing a stunning Cartier love bracelet, the same one Richard had claimed was a client gift he'd had to purchase last Christmas. He had told her it was for the wife of a Japanese investor. Another piece clicked into place. The lies weren't just casual. They were intricate, layered, and built with a chilling degree of forethought. But it was the financial section of Miller's report that truly turned the ice in her veins to steel. Richard had set up a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. He had been siphoning funds from Ethereum Dynamics, disguised as consulting fees, into this offshore account. The account was in his name only. He wasn't just planning a romantic getaway. He was building a golden parachute, preparing to exit their marriage and leave her with the hollow shell of their life together. He was systematically stripping their shared assets, stealing the wealth that she too had helped build through years of social maneuvering, hosting investors, and creating the stable, perfect home life that allowed him to focus solely on his empire. She remembered the prenuptial agreement she had signed all those years ago. Her father had warned her against it. It was ironclad, designed by Richard's aggressive lawyers to protect his company assets. But it had one clause, a morality clause that her father's legal team had insisted upon. In the event of proven infidelity leading to the dissolution of the marriage, the division of assets would be drastically renegotiated in her favor. Richard, in his arrogance, had probably forgotten it even existed. He had likely assumed she would never have the means or the nerve to prove anything. Sitting in her silent, sun-drenched study, Shannon felt the last vestiges of the heartbroken wife burn away, replaced by a cold, brilliant clarity. This was no longer about a cheating husband. This was about war. Richard had not only betrayed their vows, he had declared financial and personal warfare on her, all while smiling and kissing her head. She picked up the phone again. This time she dialed a number she knew by heart, a number that connected to a quiet estate in the rolling hills of Virginia. "Hello, Dad," she said, her voice dropping a fraction, losing its Californian lilt and regaining the crisp East Coast cadence of her youth. "I need your help. It's about Richard." There was a pause on the other end, and then the voice of Arthur Valina, a retired diplomat and corporate raider, came through calm and dangerous. "I see. Tell me everything, and leave nothing out." Shannon did. She laid out the affair, the lies, the Shell Corporation, and the Monaco trip. She spoke not as a victim, but as a strategist outlining an opponent's weaknesses. When she finished, there was another long silence. "The man is a fool," Arthur Valina said, finally his voice laced with contempt. "He mistook your patience for weakness, a common and often fatal mistake. What do you want to do, Shannon?" "I don't want to leave him," she said, and her father could hear the steel in her tone. "I want to dismantle him. I want to take everything he values, starting with that ridiculous jet." A low chuckle came through the phone. "That's my girl," Arthur said. "Monaco, you say, excellent. I have friends there. Old friends. Let's get to work." He wants to disrupt the future fine. Let's disrupt his. Shannon Valina. Sterling had not always been a quiet homemaker. Before she was Mrs. Sterling, she was Shannon Valina, top of her class at MIT with a dual degree in aerospace logistics and finance. She had been on a fast track to a formidable career on Wall Street, or perhaps even at NASA, a path she willingly set aside when she fell in love with a brilliant, charming, and ambitious software engineer named Richard Sterling. She had believed in his vision, and she had chosen to invest her formidable intellect into building their life and supporting his career. It was a choice she had never regretted until now. Now that dormant part of her mind, the part that saw the world as a series of complex systems to be analyzed and optimized, warred back to life. Her study transformed into a command center. The decorative laptop on her desk was replaced with a powerful encrypted machine provided by her father's security team. The walls once bare were now covered in flowcharts, timelines, and financial diagrams. Her first area of attack was Ethereum dynamics. For years, she had passively absorbed information at dinner parties and board member gatherings. She knew the players, the finances, the company's structure. Now she actively hunted for weaknesses. With the help of a forensic accounting team her father had on retainer, a team so discreet they were known as the Ghosts, she began to unravel Richard's financial web. The Ghosts found the wire transfers to the Cayman Islands Shell Corporation, Sterling Holdings International. They were cleverly disguised but ultimately traceable. Richard had been bleeding money from his own company, millions of dollars, under the guise of paying for non-existent data analysis services. He was not only cheating on his wife, he was committing fraud against his shareholders and his board of directors. This was the leverage she needed. It was more powerful than any infidelity clause. "He's leveraged to the hilt," her father told her during one of their encrypted nightly calls. He used his Ethereum stock as collateral for the loan on the G700. If the stock price takes a significant hit, the bank will call the loan. He'll lose the jet. A margin call of that magnitude could trigger a cascade forcing him to liquidate his other assets. He's built a house of cards on a foundation of arrogance. So the goal isn't just to expose the affair. Shannon strategized, pacing her study. The goal is to trigger a vote of no confidence from the board. If we leak the fraud investigation at the right moment, the stock will plummet. "Precisely," Arthur said. "But the timing must be perfect. You need him to be completely isolated and unreachable when it happens. On an airplane, for instance." A slow smile spread across Shannon's face. The plan was beginning to take on a beautiful, vicious symmetry. While she focused on the financial weaponry, her father handled the logistical side. Arthur Valina was a man who understood that true power wasn't about having the most money. It was about having the right people in your debt. He made a call to an old friend in Monaco, a man who ran the port and had deep connections with the principality's most exclusive hotels and services. He made another call to a contact at the FAA. Slowly, discreetly, the pieces of the board were being set. The final, most critical piece was the pilot, Julian Croft. He had been Richard's personal pilot for over 5 years. He was loyal, professional, and utterly trusted. Richard saw him as little more than a high-class chauffeur, an employee who knew his place. Shannon, however, had always made a point to be kind to the staff. She knew Julian's wife's name was Sarah, that his son played Little League, and that he worried about putting him through college. Detective Miller's file on Julian revealed one more crucial detail: a significant debt to a Las Vegas casino, a remnant of a bad run at the poker tables 2 years prior. It was a debt Richard had discovered and paid off effectively owning Julian's loyalty. Richard held the debt over him not as a favor, but as a leash. Shannon knew she couldn't approach Julian with a threat. Richard used fear. She would use something far more powerful: liberation. She arranged a meeting at a small private airfield in San Jose, far from the prying eyes of their Atherton home. Julian arrived, his face etched with worry, clearly expecting to be fired or reprimanded for some unknown transgression. Shannon got straight to the point. "Julian, I know about your debt to my husband." The color drained from the pilot's face. "Mrs. Sterling, You don't need to explain," she said, holding up a hand. "I also know that you are a good man who made a mistake, and that my husband is using it to his advantage. He's not flying to Geneva on Tuesday. He's flying a Ms. Chloe Summers to Monaco for the Grand Prix." Julian's eyes fell to the ground. His silence was his confession. "He is also committing massive fraud against his company, and he is planning to leave me with nothing." Shannon continued, her voice devoid of emotion. "I'm not going to let that happen. I have a plan, and I need your help." She slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a bank statement, a trust account set up in the name of Julian's son, containing enough money to pay for any university in the country with plenty left over. Next to it was a document confirming his Las Vegas debt had been cleared, paid in full from an anonymous source. Julian stared at the screen, speechless. "This is not a bribe, Julian," Shannon said softly. "This is your freedom. Your debt is gone. Your son's future is secure. All I ask in return is your cooperation on Tuesday. I don't want you to do anything dangerous or illegal. I just need you to follow a slightly modified flight plan. I need a delay. An hour, perhaps 90 minutes. Blame it on headwinds, a minor avionics glitch, a rerouting from air traffic control. Something plausible that won't show up on the jet's logs as negligence." Julian looked up, his eyes meeting hers. He saw no hysteria, no vengeful rage. He saw a commander, a woman of immense strength and resolve. He had flown Richard Sterling for 5 years, enduring his arrogance, his condescension, his casual cruelty. He had seen him with other women. He had always been kind to Mrs. Sterling, a woman who treated him and the rest of the staff with a respect her husband never showed. "He told me to file a flight plan for Geneva, then switch the destination to Monaco once we were airborne." Julian admitted, his voice low. "To hide it from the company logs." "I expected as much," Shannon said with a nod. "So you'll do it?" Julian looked at the tablet again, at the promise of a future for his son, free from the shadow of his own mistakes. He looked at Shannon, a woman fighting back against a bully. The choice was simple. "Yes, Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice firm. "I'll do it. Just tell me what you need." "Excellent," Shannon replied, closing the tablet. "Now let me tell you about another flight taking off on Tuesday. A Bombardier Global 8000. It's faster than the Gulfstream, and I'll be on it." The morning of the flight was a masterpiece of domestic theatre. Shannon woke at dawn preparing Richard's favorite breakfast of coffee and croissants, which she'd had flown in from a specific Parisian bakery he loved. It was a small, intimate gesture, the kind of detail a loving wife would remember, and it served its purpose perfectly. It lulled him into a state of supreme, self-satisfied confidence. "You're spoiling me, Elle," he said, kissing her cheek as he grabbed his briefcase. "Don't worry. I'll bring you back some proper Swiss chocolate, not that tourist rubbish." "Have a safe flight, darling," she said, adjusting his tie. Her touch was light, her smile serene. "I'll see you on Friday." He walked out the door, a king leaving his castle, utterly oblivious that his kingdom was already under siege. Shannon watched his car disappear down the long, winding driveway. The moment it was out of sight, her entire demeanor shifted. The soft smile vanished, replaced by a look of intense focus. She went to her study, where a large monitor showed a satellite map of the Bay Area. A small icon representing Richard's car crawled towards the San Jose private airport. Another icon showed the location of the Gulfstream G700, the Apex. Her own preparations were already complete. A single discreet suitcase was packed. Her phone buzzed with a message from her father. "All assets are in place. The board is primed. Godspeed." She made one final call to the lead forensic accountant. "Is the package ready?" "Ready and authenticated, Mrs. Sterling," the voice on the other end confirmed. "A complete dossier on the fraudulent transfers, embezzlement, and the Cayman account. It's ready to be delivered to the board's chairman and the SEC simultaneously. We just need your go-ahead." "You'll have it the moment my husband's jet is over the Atlantic," she said. At the point of no return. An hour later, her own car, a nondescript black sedan, pulled up not to the main terminal of San Jose Airport, but to a private hangar on the far side of the field, owned by a charter company called Valina Aviation. It was a boutique operation her father had quietly owned for decades. Waiting on the tarmac was a Bombardier Global 8000, a jet even faster and with a longer range than Richard's Gulfstream. Its engines were already whining, ready for immediate departure. The pilot, a stern-faced woman with sharp blue eyes named Eva Rostova, greeted her at the steps. "Mrs. Sterling, we're ready for you. We have a clear flight path direct to Nice Côte d'Azur Airport. We'll make up for the late departure." Shannon nodded and boarded. The interior of the Bombardier was a stark contrast to Richard's G700. There were no mahogany panels or entertainment systems. It was configured as a mobile office with comfortable leather chairs, a large conference table, and high-speed satellite Wi-Fi. It was a tool, not a toy. As her jet taxied to the runway, she saw it. Across the airfield, the Apex was glistening in the morning sun. She watched as a sleek black car pulled up and Chloe Summers stepped out. She was dressed in designer travel wear, a large pair of sunglasses perched on her head, looking every bit the part of the pampered mistress. Richard was there to greet her, taking her carry-on and guiding her up the steps with a proprietary hand on her waist. The scene was so brazen, so utterly cliché, that Shannon felt a surprising pang, not of jealousy, but of pity for the girl. She was a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was playing. The G700 took off first, a powerful and graceful ascent into the California sky. 15 minutes later, Shannon's Bombardier was cleared for takeoff. "Let's go, Eva," Shannon said into the intercom. The Global 8000 rocketed down the runway, its ascent steeper and faster than the Gulfstream's. Eva was a former Israeli Air Force pilot, and she flew the jet with military precision. They climbed to their cruising altitude of 51,000 feet, well above commercial air traffic, where the air was thinner and the ride smoother and faster. On board Richard's plane, the atmosphere was one of celebration. The moment they reached cruising altitude, Chloe popped a bottle of Dom Perignon. "To us," she said, clinking her glass against Richard's. "And to Monaco." "To Monaco." Richard repeated, a smug grin on his face. He felt a profound sense of freedom. He had his beautiful, exciting mistress beside him, and his doting, clueless wife was at home, probably arranging flowers. He had it all. He sent Shannon a text. "Takeoff was smooth, already buried in paperwork for the conference. Thinking of you. R." He showed the text to Chloe, who giggled. "You're terrible," she purred, snuggling closer to him. Just then the intercom crackled. It was Julian. "Afternoon, Mr. Sterling. Just a small heads up. Air traffic control has a bit of weather over the Rockies. They're rerouting us on a slightly more northerly track. It might add about 30 or 40 minutes to our flight time to Geneva." Of course, he didn't say Monaco over the open channel. "Fine, fine, whatever it takes," Richard said dismissively, waving a hand at the cockpit door. He was too engrossed in his champagne and his companion to care about a minor delay. A few minutes later, Julian spoke again. "And, sir, we seem to be having a minor fluctuation in one of the secondary avionics systems. It's nothing to worry about, purely precautionary, but regulations require us to descend to a lower altitude and reduce speed until we've run a full diagnostic. It could add another 45 minutes or so. I'm very sorry for the inconvenience." "For God's sake, Julian, just handle it." Richard snapped his good mood, slightly soured by the incompetence of his staff. "That's what I pay you for." He turned back to Chloe, oblivious. 90 minutes. A perfect, plausible, and professionally executed delay. Miles away and 10,000 feet above them, Shannon's Bombardier Global 8000 sliced through the stratosphere, unimpeded a silver needle stitching a path straight to the heart of her husband's empire. The journey across the Atlantic became a tale of two vastly different realities, unfolding in parallel pressurized cabins miles apart. On board the Gulfstream G700, Richard Sterling was living out his fantasy. He and Chloe feasted on catered sushi and caviar, the champagne flowing freely. Chloe, sensing Richard's irritation from the flight delays, turned her considerable charm on him. She was an expert at soothing the fragile egos of powerful men. She took selfies, careful to keep Richard's face out of the frame, but making sure to capture the plush cream leather and the Ethereum Dynamics logo subtly embroidered on the headrests. Her captions were vague but suggestive. "On my way to paradise, Hanschod jet set. Luxury life, must blessed. When we get to Monaco, the first thing we're doing is going to the casino," she said, draping her legs over his. "I feel lucky." "We can do whatever you want, sweetheart," Richard said, his mood restored. He felt expansive, powerful. He was flying over the world in his private sky palace, with a woman who adored him, leaving all his responsibilities behind. He looked out the window at the endless blue of the ocean below. He felt like a god, untouchable. He decided to send another text to Shannon. It was part of the game, a way to reinforce his alibi, and on some subconscious level to mock her ignorance. "Symposium is going to be a drag, stuck next to a German physicist who smells of cabbage. Wish I was home with you." The lie was so effortless, it didn't even register as a moral failing. It was simply a necessary piece of data entry in the management of his life. Meanwhile, on the Bombardier Global 8000, the atmosphere was that of a war room. There were no champagne flutes, only mugs of black coffee. Shannon sat at the conference table, a satellite phone to her ear, her laptop open to a secure video conference. On the screen were the faces of her father, Arthur Valina, her lead lawyer, and the head of the forensic accounting team. "Julian has confirmed the delay," Shannon reported, her voice crisp. "They are 94 minutes behind schedule. Our ETA is 16:30 local time. His is now estimated at 18:04. The package was delivered to the board chairman's home 5 minutes ago," the lawyer confirmed. "He is reviewing it now. The SEC whistleblower submission was filed electronically at the same time." "What's the market status?" Shannon asked. The US stock markets had been open for several hours. "Ethereum stock is stable for now," the accountant replied. "But the chairman has called an emergency virtual board meeting for 900 a.m. Pacific Time. That's 1800 Central European Time, right as Richard is scheduled to land. The timing was exquisite. Richard would be stepping off his jet completely out of touch and unprepared at the exact moment his board of directors would be convening to discuss evidence of his career-ending fraud. "The team is in place in Monaco," Arthur Valina added from his study in Virginia. "The hotel has been cooperative. The suite is ready for you. The legal couriers are on standby at the airport." Shannon looked out her own window. The sky was a deep, brilliant indigo at this altitude. She wasn't looking at the beauty of it, but at the curvature of the earth, the vast distance she was covering. She was not just flying to Monaco. She was flying into her future. The fear and hurt she had felt just days ago had been transmuted into something else entirely, a cold, hard sense of purpose. She had spent 15 years helping Richard build his empire, sacrificing her own ambitions for his. She had hosted the awkward dinners, charmed the difficult investors, and managed the complex social life that allowed him the freedom to create. She was the unseen architect of his success, and he had made the fatal error of believing she was just part of the furniture. "Eva," she said into the intercom, "can we push it? I want to be on the ground as early as possible." "Strap in, Mrs. Sterling." The pilot's voice came back, calm and confident. "I'll see if I can't find a shortcut." The powerful Rolls-Royce engines of the Bombardier spooled up slightly, a subtle shift in tone that signaled an increase in speed. The jet was already flying at nearly the speed of sound, but now it pushed the boundary a silver ghost, outrunning the sun. Below and behind them, the Gulfstream chugged along at its reduced speed. Julian Croft in the cockpit ran another pointless diagnostic. He felt a grim satisfaction. He was no longer Richard Sterling's leashed dog. He was an agent of karma, delivering a long overdue reckoning, one carefully manufactured delay at a time. Richard, laughing with his mistress in the cabin behind him, had no idea that his trusted pilot was flying him not toward a romantic tryst, but directly into the perfectly laid jaws of a trap. The Côte d'Azur was a glittering jewel as the Bombardier Global 8000 began its descent. The Mediterranean Sea was a brilliant sapphire dotted with the white triangles of sailboats and the colossal shapes of superyachts. The coastline curved elegantly, revealing the dense terracotta-roofed cityscape of Monaco, a principality built on wealth and discretion. Eva Rostova landed the jet with a feather-light touch at the Nice Côte d'Azur airport. It was 16:22 local time. A black Mercedes Maybach was already waiting on the tarmac, its engine running. The door was opened by a man in a dark suit who nodded respectfully to Shannon as she descended the steps. "Mrs. Sterling," he said in French-accented English. "Welcome. Everything is arranged as per Mr. Valina's instructions." There was no passport control, no customs. Her arrival had been smoothed over by the quiet, pervasive influence of her father. Within minutes, she was speeding along the coastal highway towards Monaco. The air was warm and smelled of salt and jasmine. It was breathtakingly beautiful, but Shannon took no notice. She was a general surveying the battlefield just before the first shots were fired. They did not drive to the main entrance of the opulent Hôtel de Paris Monte Carlo. Instead, the Maybach slipped into a private underground entrance leading to a service elevator. There she was met not by a concierge, but by the hotel's general manager, a distinguished man named Monsieur Dubois. "Mrs. Sterling," he said with a slight bow, "an honor to welcome you. Your suite, the Princess Grace suite, is ready." "Thank you, Monsieur Dubois," Shannon said. "I trust the reservation details have been updated." "Of course," he replied, handing her a set of electronic keycards. "The suite and all associated accounts are now solely in the name of Shannon Valina Sterling. We have been instructed to refuse access to anyone else, including your husband." They rode the private elevator in silence. The Princess Grace Suite was one of the most exclusive hotel rooms in the world, a 2-floor penthouse with panoramic views of the harbor and the Prince's Prince's palace. Richard had booked it for a week, a grand, romantic gesture for his mistress. When Shannon stepped inside, she could see that the hotel staff had already been at work. On a large marble table were bouquets of her favorite flowers, white orchids replacing the red roses Richard would have ordered for Chloe. A bottle of chilled Pellegrino, her preferred drink, sat in an ice bucket instead of champagne. The suite had been subtly but completely tailored to her. It had been conquered. She walked out onto the vast terrace. Below, the city was alive with the energy of the upcoming Grand Prix. The famous hairpin turn of the racetrack was directly beneath her. She could see the harbor filled with yachts the size of naval destroyers. It was a playground for the world's wealthiest, a place Richard saw as his natural habitat. She checked her watch. 1740. Richard's Gulfstream would be starting its descent soon. The emergency board meeting at Ethereum Dynamics was beginning in 20 minutes. On a small table, a laptop was already set up. She opened it. The secure video link to the board meeting was live. She wouldn't speak, but she had been granted observer access by the chairman, who was an old family friend of the Valinas. She was a ghost in the machine. She watched as the panicked, confused faces of the board members appeared on screen. The chairman, a stoic man named Thomas Chen, began the meeting. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice grave, "I have received a dossier containing highly credible and deeply disturbing allegations of financial misconduct by our CEO, Mr. Richard Sterling." At that exact moment, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Tarmac team is in position. Courier 1 and Courier 2 are ready." Shannon took a sip of water and looked out at the setting sun, which was painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. The scene was perfectly calm, a stark contrast to the chaos she had just unleashed thousands of miles away, and the personal storm that was about to make landfall right here in Monaco. She had taken control of the narrative. The woman he thought was at home, arranging flowers, was now sitting in his penthouse suite, watching his empire burn. At 1804 local time, the Gulfstream G700, the Apex, executed a flawless landing on the private airstrip at Nice Côte d'Azur Airport. The touchdown was so smooth, it was like a whisper on the sun-baked tarmac. Inside the cabin, Richard Sterling unbuckled his seatbelt with the supreme confidence of a king returning to his dominion. The frustrations of the flight delays manufactured so perfectly by Julian had melted away, replaced by the intoxicating thrill of arrival. "Welcome to our new life," he murmured to Chloe, leaning in to give her a lingering kiss. He was buoyant, filled with a sense of magnificent, untethered freedom. "The Rolls-Royce should be waiting. We'll be at the hotel in 30 minutes. I hope you're ready for the best week of your life." "I was born ready," she purred, checking her reflection in her compact mirror and fluffing her hair. She looked radiant, a perfect jewel for his arm. She envisioned the flash of cameras, the envy in the eyes of other women, the sheer power of being with a man like Richard. The hydraulic ramp lowered with a soft hiss, opening to the balmy golden light of the French Riviera. This was the moment Richard lived, for the theatrical reveal, the transition from the sterile luxury of the jet to the adoring welcome of the world. He stepped onto the platform, expecting to see the familiar face of a driver holding a placard, the sleek black hood of a waiting phantom, the subtle deference of the ground crew. Instead, he was met with an unnerving stillness. There was no car, no driver, no welcoming committee. Only 2 men and 1 woman stood at the bottom of the stairs on the vast, empty expanse of concrete. One was his pilot, Julian Croft, who had disembarked with unusual speed and now stood with his arms crossed, his face a mask of professional neutrality. The other 2 were strangers, a man and a woman, both dressed in severe, dark business attire that seemed out of place in the relaxed glamour of the Côte d'Azur. They looked less like a reception party and more like undertakers. "What's this, Julian? Where's the car I ordered?" Richard demanded, his voice sharp with irritation as he descended the stairs. Chloe a step behind him. The triumphant mood was already beginning to curdle into annoyance. This was a sloppy, unacceptable failure of logistics. Julian didn't answer immediately. He simply watched his employer approach, his expression unreadable. The man in the suit stepped forward, his movements precise and economical. He held a sleek, dark tablet, and without a word of greeting, he angled the screen toward Richard. The screen flickered to life, showing a crystal-clear live video feed. The image was of a lavish hotel suite, instantly recognizable to Richard as the Princess Grace suite he had so proudly booked. And there, seated on a plush, cream-colored sofa, with the elegance and composure of a monarch in her own throne room, was Shannon, his wife. She was holding a delicate porcelain teacup, her gaze directed out the panoramic window towards the glittering harbor below. She was serene, beautiful, and utterly impossibly there. The shock was a physical event, a concussive force that struck Richard in the chest and stole the air from his lungs. He stumbled back a step, his hand flying instinctively to his breast pocket, as if to check for his wallet or his phone, some anchor to a reality that had just been torn from its moorings. His mind, a finely tuned machine that processed data and solved complex problems at lightning speed, simply stopped. It was a fatal error, a blue screen of cognitive dissonance. Shannon was in Atherton. She was watering her orchids. She was at her book club. She could not be in Monaco. What is this, a joke?" He stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. He looked wildly from the impossible image on the tablet to Julian, his eyes pleading for an explanation, for a punchline to a cruel prank. Julian finally met his gaze. The subservience that had defined their 5-year relationship was gone, replaced by something cold-hard and deeply satisfying. "Mrs. Sterling sends her regards, sir." The pilot said, his voice perfectly, even each word a carefully placed stone on the grave of Richard's world. "She landed 90 minutes ago. She asked me to inform you that your services with Valina Aviation's charter program are no longer required." Valina Aviation. Richard echoed the name, meaning nothing to him. His brain was still trying to solve the paradox of Shannon's presence. "My apologies," Julian said, a ghost of a smirk touching his lips. "I meant to say your wife's charter program. She is the majority shareholder." The legal courier in the suit took another step forward, his voice cutting through Richard's daze. "Mr. Richard Sterling?" he asked, the tone formal and utterly devoid of warmth. Richard could only nod, his throat tight. "You are being served." The man's voice was the sound of a guillotine dropping. He produced a thick, leather-bound portfolio from a briefcase and handed it to Richard. Richard's hands took it automatically, his fingers numb. "These are divorce papers, citing infidelity and corporate fraud." Chloe, who had been watching this bizarre scene unfold with growing unease, gasped. The word infidelity hung in the air, a direct accusation. The courier wasn't finished. He produced a second document. "This is a temporary restraining order barring you from approaching Mrs. Shannon Valina Sterling or entering any shared properties, which now includes the hotel suite you are booked into." Richard stared blankly at the papers. His name, Shannon's name, legal terms swimming before his eyes. It was a nightmare. Then came the third and most devastating blow. The courier handed over a second, even thicker portfolio. "And this is a notice from the board of Ethereum Dynamics. Pursuant to an emergency meeting that concluded minutes ago, you are being placed on immediate and indefinite leave, pending a full investigation into embezzlement and securities fraud. Your corporate accounts, assets, and credit lines have been frozen effective immediately." That was the word that finally broke through to Chloe. Frozen. She looked at Richard, truly looked at him, and for the first time she did not see the powerful, untouchable titan who had promised her the world. She saw a pale, trembling man cornered and broken. She saw a liability. Her meticulously planned future, a life of endless Cartier and effortless luxury, shattered into a million pieces on that hot tarmac. Her expression hardened, her survival instincts kicking in. She took a half step back, subtly disassociating herself from the wreckage. Richard's world had collapsed into a vortex of legal documents and impossible realities. He felt a surge of desperate, impotent rage. He looked up from the papers that represented the complete annihilation of his life, his eyes searching for something to hold on to, something that was still his. His gaze fell upon the magnificent silver jet glistening in the setting sun, his G700, the apex, the one thing that proved who he was. As if on cue, the woman in the dark suit stepped forward. Her voice was clinical, her expression impassive. "Mr. Sterling," she began, "we represent the financial institution that holds the lien on this aircraft. Due to the catastrophic drop in Ethereum's stock price in the last hour and the resulting margin call on your collateralized loan, you are in default. We are legally repossessing the asset." She gestured towards the jet. "You and your guest will need to remove your personal belongings immediately. The ground crew will assist you." It was the final, most emasculating humiliation. They were taking his jet, stripping it from him right here in front of his mistress and his pilot, like a child's toy, being confiscated. The ultimate symbol of his success, of his very identity, was being repossessed like a deadbeat's car. Richard Sterling stood on the tarmac in Monaco, the warm Mediterranean breeze doing nothing to stop the icy dread that had flooded his entire being. He was holding a stack of papers that had, in the space of 3 minutes, erased his marriage, his career, his fortune, and his legacy. His mistress was inching away from him as if he were contagious. His pilot, the man he had treated like a piece of equipment, was watching him with the quiet contempt of a subordinate who had witnessed his master's downfall. And high above the city, in a penthouse suite that was no longer his wife, the quiet, underestimated woman he had dismissed as a beautiful piece of decor, was watching it all unfold. He had flown halfway across the world in his private chariot, certain he was the pilot of his own destiny. He had arrived only to find that his wife had beaten him to his destination, and she'd brought the real pilot justice. And it had landed first. In the end, Richard Sterling lost everything. The board of Ethereum Dynamics, armed with the undeniable proof Shannon had provided, voted unanimously to remove him. Faced with shareholder lawsuits and an SEC investigation, he was forced into a settlement that stripped him of his company, his fortune, and his reputation. The jet was sold, The houses were sold. He became a ghost in the Silicon Valley world he once ruled. Chloe Summers vanished from social media, her moment in the sun having ended in a spectacular crash and burn. And Shannon. She didn't just divorce him. She inherited his kingdom. At the insistence of the board, and with the backing of her father's capital, Shannon Valina took over as the interim CEO of Ethereum Dynamics. She revealed the sharp, strategic mind she had hidden for so long, streamlining the company, restoring investor confidence, and leading it to even greater heights. She wasn't a woman scorned. She was a leader revealed. She proved that the most dangerous person is the one everyone underestimates. What do you think of Shannon's meticulously planned revenge? Was it a brilliant masterstroke of justice or a cold, calculated act of destruction? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of a woman who refused to be a victim and instead became the victor, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a good story of triumph, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more tales of karma and consequence. Thank you for listening.